Welcome to this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Charlene Aaron.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. Today on the broadcast, religious freedom under fire. Why the godless attack on people of faith has been escalating in the last 5 years.
But first, we go to the CBN newsroom for the latest news of the day.
President Obama is encouraging peace amid growing tensions between police and protesters in Ferguson, Missouri. Racial tensions are high and riots broke out there after police shot and killed Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, on August 9th. Protesters say Brown had his hands raised and did nothing wrong. Police say the officer involved in the shooting was assaulted and had to be taken to the hospital for facial injuries after the incident. Dozens have been arrested since the protests began. 2 reporters from the Washington Post and Huffington Post were also arrested. The reporters say they were assaulted by officers when they refused to stop recording the proceedings. The president calls the situation heartbreaking and says now is the time to remember that we are all Americans.
We lost a young man, Michael Brown, in heartbreaking and tragic circumstances. There is never an excuse for violence against police or for those who would use this tragedy as a cover for vandalism or looting. There's also no excuse for police to use excessive force against peaceful protests. And here in the United States of America, police should not be bullying or arresting journalists who are just trying to do their jobs.
President Obama says he has asked the FBI and the Justice Department to look into Brown's death. Meanwhile, he is facing criticism for taking a vacation while the nation deals with both national and international conflicts. We're joined now by Pastor Joe Stevens of Passage Community Church in Florissant, Missouri, a community right next to Ferguson. Pastor Joe, since the shooting over the weekend and the protests and violence that it sparked, what has been your concern as a church?
The biggest concern we've had is figuring out ways that we can go be the hands and feet of Jesus in our community. What has happened and transpired is not the Ferguson that I grew up in. I grew up at First Baptist Ferguson, attending church there before God called me to start a church. And with that, this community is much better than what is being portrayed on TV.
Well, I understand that there was a prayer meeting Tuesday with both white and black churches represented. Tell us about that.
On Tuesday, there was a prayer meeting held with both blacks and whites, as well as 2 prayer meetings last night. And so it's been just an overwhelming response to see people come together and pray. Last night, I was privileged to be a part of one in the heart of Ferguson at First Baptist Church of Ferguson. And we had about 21 pastors from all over the area driving as far as 45 minutes away to come and to pray. And the whole service was centered around reading scripture, praying in groups, and we actually had 4 African-American pastors lead out and 3 Anglo or white pastors lead out. So it was neat to see the diversity, not only racially, but also we had an age ranging from 6 weeks old all the way up till senior adults. So it was very moving as far as what Jesus is doing.
Amen. That's wonderful. Well, do you see churches coming together around this situation? Just from what you said, it sounds like they really are.
There is a lot of churches attempting to do good works, as well as just the community in general. Cleanup. We did a cleanup effort yesterday, and there was about 150, 200 people that just walked the streets of Ferguson, and they cleaned up trash from the sidewalks, from the street, from the parking lots, just to beautify the city, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and see this community redeemed, bought back by the hands and feet of people who want to serve. And there are other things going on. Saturday, there are service activities planned. There are block parties planned. There are food drives and school supply drives. There's a big emphasis just to reach out to the citizens of Ferguson and the surrounding areas.
All right, Pastor Joe Stevens, thank you for your time today, sir, and we commend your efforts.
Thank you very much for having me.
In other news, the U.S. has launched another airstrike on Islamic terrorists in northern Iraq, but it's now far less likely that the U.S. military will conduct any rescue and evacuation missions to help the trapped Yazidi people. Dale Hurd explains why.
A humanitarian aid drop to the refugees stranded on Mount Sinjar. In 5 days, the U.S. military has delivered more than 114,000 meals and more than 35,000 gallons of water to the desperate Yazidi people. But the U.S. may not do much more than that, because the Pentagon says American military advisors on the mountain found far fewer refugees than expected. U.S. officials say the airdrops of food and water have made a difference, and that airstrikes on Islamic State targets have allowed for many of the Yazidis to escape. United Nations officials Wednesday condemned reports of sexual violence by Muslim militants against women and children of the Iraqi minorities.
They say they have received atrocious accounts on the abduction and detention of Yazidi, Christian, Turkmen, and Shabak women and girls and boys, and reports of savage rapes. Some 1,500 Yazidis and Christians may have been forced into sexual slavery.
Meanwhile, a team of 129 Marines and Special Forces has been assessing the threat to the refugees.
You look at corridors, you look at airlifts, you look at different ways to move people who are in a very dangerous place on that mountain to a safer position.
But at issue now is whether the president, elected on a platform of ending the Iraq War, will heed the many calls for a military campaign to contain or destroy the Islamic State, an undertaking that could dominate U.S. foreign policy for the remainder of his term. His own defense secretary said the group poses a threat to the civilized world, but the president has authorized only a limited campaign of targeted airstrikes designed to protect refugees and American personnel in the Kurdish region, but not take out the group's leadership or logistical hubs.
The role of U.S. forces is not one of re-entering combat on the ground. It's how to provide humanitarian assistance to this affected population.
A strategy to destroy the Islamic State would not require large numbers of American ground troops, but it would require military action in western Syria, where the Islamic State is headquartered. And perhaps most importantly, it could stretch combat operations into the election season. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
The Kurdish army is diligently working to keep the ISIS militants at bay with the heavily armed terrorists nearing the capital of Kurdistan. The army is asking for help from outside sources, and some are answering. Chris Mitchell reports from Erbil.
This is Chris Mitchell reporting from Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, and one of the epicenters of this ongoing crisis in northern Iraq. It may look like an ordinary day, but the situation here is anything but normal. Erbil and this land have become a land of refugees. More than 1 million refugees have fled to this city alone. And if you want an idea of how close the front lines are, it's just about a 30-minute drive away. We were up there yesterday and heard reports of a military buildup by both ISIS and the Kurdish military called the Peshmerga. And yesterday, the Peshmerga got good news. Britain announced that it would send ammunition, and France announced it would be sending heavy weaponry to the Kurdish military. Heavy weapons are very important to the Peshmerga. Commanders have told us that ISIS is able to shell them while staying out of range. The equipment used by ISIS was plundered from the Iraqi army that was originally supplied by the United States. The U.S. airstrikes have continued, and that's been a big boost to the Kurds. In fact, about 10 days ago, many Kurds felt ISIS would attack Erbil, and some even fled the city. The Pentagon announced 130 advisors would be sent to the region, and one of their goals is to help rescue the thousands of Yazidis stranded out in Mount Sinjar. That's about a 3-hour drive from here in Erbil. According to the UN, that crisis with the Yazidis is their highest level of emergency. According to reports, ISIS has massacred hundreds of men and taken at least over 100 women and children. Many of the women have been used as sex slaves and pressured into converting to Islam. Finally, we've also seen many of the churches in Erbil reaching out to help the thousands of Christians and non-Christians who have fled the scourge of ISIS. As we've reported, many of these people tell us horror stories about how ISIS stole property and gave them the chance to either leave, convert, or die. We'll bring you that story and more in our continuing coverage of the crisis here in northern Iraq. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Erbil, Kurdistan.
ISIS militants imprisoned in the same Iranian jail as Saeed Abedini are threatening to kill the American pastor. The American Center for Law and Justice says Saeed told family members other inmates warned him about the plot. Even though Saeed lives in a different part of the jail, he still fears for his life. He's relying on other prisoners for protection and stays in his cell during daily exercise time when prisoners mingle together. The ACLJ's Jay Sekulow is calling on President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry to act immediately to secure Saeed's release. A convoy of nearly 300 Russian vehicles is still headed for Ukraine, despite disagreements on allowing it to enter the country. The trucks appear to be heading toward Luhansk, which is controlled by pro-Russia separatists. But a tentative agreement calls for them to enter at a government-controlled crossing where the Red Cross can then inspect. The convoy had been parked since Tuesday amid concerns that Russia would try to smuggle in troops or weapons. Russia says it's simply supplying humanitarian aid to people there. Coming up, walls of water crashing through glass and washing away cars. CBN's Ephraim Graham and Charlene Aaron. They're back with a story of widespread flash flooding shocking entire communities across the nation.
Communities across the U.S. are recovering today from major flooding left behind by heavy rains this week. Watch how almost 9 feet of water breaks through the window of this Good Samaritan hospital in Nebraska. Like many other communities across the country, they were unaware of how much rain was coming. In New York, a new record. The city of Babylon was slammed with 13 inches of rain in just a few hours. The city's drainage system can only sustain 5 inches over a 24-hour period.
My house is like on an island right now. I have water all around my whole house.
These are your cars here?
Yeah, they were my cars. They're all gone.
Michigan issued a disaster declaration for the Detroit area after rain and mud closed stretches of freeway. The wild weather is blamed for at least 4 deaths so far.
Another night of violent protests in that St. Louis suburb where a young, unarmed black man was killed by a police officer. Some protesters threw Molotov cocktails and other objects, and police say 24 patrol vehicles have now been destroyed. Police have responded with tear gas and smoke bombs. For a third straight night, demonstrators took to the streets demanding justice for 18-year-old Michael Brown, who was shot Saturday. During the daytime, protesters have been peaceful, but at night, they've turned violent. Protesters say Brown had his hands raised and did nothing wrong. Police say the officer involved in the shooting was assaulted and had to be taken to the hospital for facial injuries following that incident.
His face was swollen, so he'd obviously been hit or punched or something like that.
So when we see violence and we see protests that turn to violence, it frustrates us, it grieves our heart. And not only does it grieve our heart, but it denigrates the memory of a young man who died on the street of Ferguson.
The FBI is now involved in investigating the shooting.
Colorado pot sales aren't making as much money for the state as originally projected, mainly because of black market sales in the state. High sales taxes on recreational pot are causing many of the drug's users to buy from illegal sellers. Legal pot is overall more expensive than illegal pot, and without a medical card, it can even cost double than what's on the black market.
Say if I can't get a medical card, I'm going to go buy from the black market dealer down the street. The state needs to take a look at some kind of a tax break for a period of time on recreational.
It is estimated about 40% of pot sales in the state are from the black market.
A school board in California is sending a sex education textbook back to the publisher. It comes after parents complained the book is too graphic for 9th graders. The San Francisco Chronicle reports the Fremont School Board voted Wednesday to send back the new book and use last year's textbook instead. The new book includes references to sex toys, bondage, erotic touch, and dating websites. The school board is hoping the publisher can make the necessary changes.
Up next, one nation under God, or a nation going under. Fox News radio host Todd Starnes gives us his take on godless America after this. Dark clouds are gathering here in America, and a great storm is approaching.
That is the warning coming from a top Fox News host who says people of faith are coming under fire like never before. Take a look.
In his role as a popular Fox News radio host and commentator, Todd Starnes follows the latest developments in today's culture war. In his latest book, Godless America, Starnes lays out in great detail the growing attacks on religious liberty and Christianity in the United States. And while he presents it all in his trademark Southern storytelling style with humor and wit, His book shows that the assault on traditional values in America is no laughing matter.
And Heather Sells spoke with Todd Starnes about his new book, Godless America. She asked him why he believes the war on faith has increased so dramatically in the last 5 years.
Back when President Obama was campaigning for the White House, he talked about people who cling to their guns and their religion, and he called them bitter people. And I wrote in my book about, I happen to be one of those folks, a gun-toting, chicken-eating, Bible-clinging son of a Baptist. I don't think I'm bitter. I think I'm blessed. And people sort of chuckle at that, but I think there really was something to what the president said, especially when you factor in this promise he made to his people, to his followers, that he was going to fundamentally transform the country. And I believe that we have seen this president do that. We have seen religious liberty come under attack in the business community, in the military, and in the public schools, and quite frankly, within the church itself. But I think people need to understand this is not a war against all religions. This is a war that seems to be focused and targeted on the Christian faith.
Mm-hmm. So you really see it tying in with the administration and a tone that the president's been setting and/or specific orders that he's been giving, or?
Yes and yes. Early on, the first, I want to take people back to the first Christmas in the Obama White House, where there, and this was written about by the New York Times of all people, there was a debate within the Obama family about whether or not to remove the nativity scene from the White House. I thought that was quite symbolic that the Obamas actually considered tossing the baby Jesus out of the White House at Christmas time. I thought that was one of those interesting moments that people should really pay attention to. But when you look at some of the edicts that have come down, from Obamacare to the IRS attacks on people of the Christian faith, one of the things about the IRS is that the Christian component of that sort of got left out of the media debate. Folks were more concerned about the conservatives and the Tea Party. But you actually had the Obama administration's IRS going after churches, demanding to know the content of their prayers, demanding to know their membership, who attends their congregation. But even more egregious than that, they actually audited Billy Graham, America's pastor. They audited Billy Graham. If they can go after Billy Graham, then they're going to go after the rest of us.
Now, you were just in North Carolina, the Billy Graham Library. Did they have any comments about that?
Well, that was a big issue for them because, like many other Christian organizations, they came under attack because of their support of traditional marriage in North Carolina, that marriage amendment down there. That's why they were audited. And tie that in with the Benham brothers, the two guys, the real estate guys that had their HGTV show canceled because of their support of that amendment. And the critics went out there and said that those Benham brothers, they were a religious extremist because they opposed gay marriage. Well, if that's the case, then that means Billy Graham is a religious extremist. And I truly believe that many on the left actually believe that's the case. So I think people need to really wake up and understand that there has been a massive, massive cultural shift in America. And many people who hold mainline views about God and country are now considered to be right-wing extremists.
Mm-hmm. You also write in your book about Pastor Rick Warren, a number of other pastors, but Pastor Rick Warren in particular saying that he thinks that religious liberty is going to be the civil rights issue of our generation. Do you see it that way? Oh,
I certainly do. And when Rick Warren said that, it really caused the hairs on my arm to raise up. You don't hear people like Rick Warren talking in those terms very often. So I think it was very important what he said, and I think it's very true, especially when you look back. What does that mean, the civil rights issue of our generation? Well, I think back in the 60s, men and women, Americans, African Americans, had to march in the streets. They had to engage in acts of civil disobedience for their civil rights. And I believe that we very well could see that happen in this country when it comes to people of the Christian faith.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Now, there is much more to that interview with Todd Starnes, including examples of Christianity under attack in the military and in small towns across America.
And you can find that at CBNNews.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Most children look forward to summer break, but not one Arizona family.
That's because their dad planned a special adventure that was all about work. His goal, to fight back against what he calls the entitled generation. Myra Alejandra has their story.
The Merced kids were not too happy at first. Their dad planned a 20-day trip in their family RV, doing free chores for strangers.
I think initially they thought, Dad, the chore thing has gone too far. You know, you are crazy. But as we started reading stories about the people we were going to go serve, it all started to gel for them, and I think they saw the bigger picture.
Greg Merced is a financial planner and father of 6. He decided the 6,000-mile trip would be a great way to teach his children the value of hard work and giving back.
There is work associated with money. I think that's a big, huge lesson that kind of the next generation seems like we're entitled to whatever we want. Not in my house, you know what I mean? You've got to tie work and reward together.
The Merceds have been helping families dealing with cancer and other illnesses. Their mission took them across the country and back again, to cities like Albuquerque, Chicago, Buffalo, and down to Florida, where they helped a couple whose son has a genetic disorder that requires constant medical care.
They're cleaning my car, and they're mowing our grass, they've vacuumed, they've cleaned our fish tank inside.
The kids admit they thought their dad was a little crazy when he first suggested the trip. But in the end, they learned some valuable lessons and had a lot of fun doing it. Myra Alejandra, CBN News.
Great story.
I like that, Dad.
Me too.
I'll pack up my little car with mine, too. We need to get to work.
That's right. Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
And tell us what you think about these stories at CBN News on Twitter or on Facebook as well. We'll see you right back here next time. Bye-bye.